Welcome to Psych for Psychology, a Nystrom & Associates podcast. Our host, Brett Cushing, is a licensed marriage and family therapist at Nystrom. Each week, he talks about all things mental health and therapy with guests, and you get a chance to dive into specific psychology topics that help promote personal development and wellness. And now, your host, Brett.
Welcome, everybody, to another Psyched for Psychology episode. Today, we're going to be talking about couples therapy, right?
Yeah, we haven't talked about that. And you know what I just realized?
What?
I think today marks our 1 year.
Aww.
Yeah, I just realized that. I think we've been doing that.
Podcast?
Happy birthday to podcast. Yeah. So we're not going to sing happy birthday. Well, you could because you're a really good singer. I mean, can you hear everybody listening is saying, yeah, Krista belted out here. Let's hear it.
Happy birthday, dear podcast.
Ooh, I like that.
That was more of a silly singing. But
oh, okay. But I liked it.
But just a preview of, the real talent.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just have a podcast with Krista singing sometime. But, yeah, today we're talking about couples. We've not talked about this.
Well, I'm super excited because it's been on my mind a lot lately. I actually am studying Gottman. So Gottman, for those of you who don't know, John Gottman and his wife Julie Gottman, this is like a huge name in anything having to do with couples therapy. So I remember hearing about Gottman in grad school, and it's kind of, you hear the name and the methods kind of thrown around, but it's been really fun to go back and review it because there are so many pieces of it that I had kind of forgotten. So I just kind of wanted to share a couple tidbits that have been on my mind about this. And then we'll kind of talk about, what keeps people from couples therapy, and then what is it really?
Well, this is really apropos because I remember about a year ago, we started our first podcast with John Gottman.
Nice.
And we did a Facebook Live event, and
how cool.
It was really fun. And we talked about John Gottman and how he and his wife, they really are kind of the gold standard when it comes to couples, family therapy, and research.
Sure. Well, and I don't know about you, but sometimes when I hear that someone or something is the gold standard, there's something in me that's immediately a little bit skeptical because I'm like, well, how come you have it all figured out? So right. I don't know if I've just kind of in a weird way resisted learning more about Gottman
deeply.
But now that I'm learning it, I'm like, okay, this actually makes sense. And here's one of the big reasons why they're the gold standard. So John and Julie, and then there's others, of course, who have helped, but they've done tons and tons of research. So they've done a lot of interviews with couples. They've actually observed couples interacting, and they've hooked them up to heart rate monitors. They've hooked them up to these little things that measure your sweat glands. They want to know what's physiologically happening between couples during conflict. They study their facial expression. So there's all this research. And I had kind of known that, but it was really exciting to hear about it again because it's all right, at least at the end of the day, they really have researched the crap out of this.
They really have.
And so they're not just saying I wrote a book and here's what you should do. There's a lot of backing to
it. And what I like about them too, what you're hitting on is they've been quite extensive.
So extensive.
In how they do their research.
Correct.
Very comprehensive, but also they are very positive.
Yes.
They look at what works. Many people have done research in the past and say, oh, this is what's wrong with marriage. And Gottman's a lot of times have focused on this is what's working, and this is what will work, and this is why it will work. So for those listening, you're going to really come away with some things that work, and we're going to talk a little bit too about resistance to why we're resistant to doing couples therapy.
Yeah.
And Krista and I will share a little bit what some of the feedback we hear from people that's really tidbits that have been helpful for them.
Exactly. So the first thing, research backed, that's best thing ever, right? The next thing that I love about it is it really kind of turns it, people have these preconceived notions about couples therapy and about marriage, actually. So about why do marriages end and what leads to divorce? And so they've really demystified the whole thing by saying, look, it's not, the predictors of divorce are not necessarily infidelity. I've had a lot of people come to me as a couple saying there was infidelity and I don't know if we can survive this. Well, the Gottman research has shown that infidelity itself is not necessarily a predictor. It certainly distresses the marriage, but that's not the number one predictor. So we'll get to that in a minute.
Oh boy. I thought you were going to lay it out there.
I know. Okay. Another big misconception about what leads to divorce is conflict. So people think that, we're fighting and conflict and all this stuff. And that kind of makes sense, right? But again, with the research, it's like, no, not necessarily. So it's not necessarily how much conflict. It's more the how of the conflict. So like not whether couples fight, because all couples fight, all couples argue. It's more like, how do they go about it? So, and then the kind of a third thing I'll throw in there is what they're really looking for with Gottman, and in terms of, because they've been able to predict with 94% accuracy if a couple will get divorced. Like, that's crazy.
Right.
And so, so basically, if they're seeing more negative interactions than positive, that's a really big predictor of a relationship basically not staying together. And by the way, this is both heterosexual and homosexual couples. They've done research on both.
Right.
So it's not, it's pretty extensive.
And what I like about Gottman, when I look at their research, and I discuss it with some of the couples I work with, I share, all right, here's the research. Here's what they say you can do. These are behaviors.
Yep.
These are new ways of interacting, and you can do this. So then when I lay it out there and I say, this is what needs to be done, I ask them, so percentage-wise, how much control do you think you have over the success of your marriage?
Sure, good call.
And they kind of look at me dumbfounded and say, well, I guess 100%. And that's what I so appreciate about them. It's not like it's hard, but it's not impossible.
Exactly.
These are things that are doable.
Exactly. And that's another thing about, Gottman that you had said before about it's positive. Like there's really practical takeaways. So as I've been kind of digging into it, obviously one of the big things that most people are aware of, if they've heard of Gottman, it's synonymous with this concept called the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Now, this other podcast that you had done about a year ago really gets into that more, so people should go and check that out. There's another episode, the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, that's available. So go and Psyched for Psychology, go check it out. But I'll just really briefly review it again because I think this is something that's going to help with our discussion. So the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, this is, Gottman has a lovely sense of humor. I've been watching videos of him, and he has these nice shorthand ways of saying things. So this one is, these are the big 4 things that he's in his research has picked out, the big 4 like interactions that are predictors of, basically they're signs that a relationship is in distress, and they're predictors, if not changed, that this couple could be headed for splitting up. Right. So they are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
All things I'm really good at.
Are you?
So I could put on seminars on each of those.
Okay, I love it. Well, so, and again, these are things that all of us are guilty of. And it doesn't necessarily have to just be in a romantic relationship. This can be in any close and intimate relationship, right? Yeah. So, I don't know, just briefly, just so we can kind of understand what we're talking about. Most people already know what criticism is, right? You're pointing out something, you're pointing out a flaw. Usually it has to do with the person's character versus what they're doing. So there's been clips of videos I've seen of like actual couple conversations where Gottman will show examples of, okay, here's an example of criticism. So it'll be things like, all you care about is money, right? So that's like attacking someone's character, right? That you're so materialistic, right? That's a statement of criticism. Contempt. This one is a big one because this is one I didn't realize how it always shows up, because contempt, it's almost connected with disgust. So this is where you might mock someone. And I think this is really important because a lot of people use sarcasm as their primary sense of humor. And I don't know that they realize how that can come off to their partner or to other people.
And I think they've said it's the number one indicator of contempt.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this is actually, this could be bumped up to the top of the red flag, issues, symptoms of distress in a relationship. So there was a video that Gottman showed where a husband, and both husbands and wives do it, right? But the husband was saying something like, I already always know what you're about to say. You're about to say, oh, it's okay. Oh, we're going to get through this. Oh, I love you. You know, and he's like mocking her. And it like stressed me out because I was like, I don't think this guy has any clue how damaging this is. And, and again, women do it too, but it's that, you know, you're kind of teasing, but it's in with a mean-spirited tone, right? Or sarcasm. So that's a big one. Another way that it's expressed is eye rolling. So when you're watching body language in a couple, right, it's kind of like their partner starts and they just kind of like look away or like roll their eyes or like, oh, here we go. You know?
Sometimes, I don't know what it is. Sometimes you don't have to see your partner doing the eye roll. You can feel it.
You can feel it.
You know it's there, right?
You're like, I can sense the eye roll from across the room, right? So that's contempt. The next one, defensiveness. So this is one where the person they're not going to take responsibility right away for something. So if I were to say, you know, you're always running late for appointments, and then my partner says like, I'm always running late for my appointments. What about you? You can never get ready in time, you know? So that's defensiveness. Instead of saying like, you know what, you're right, I do that. They're kind of throwing it back and saying like, oh, you want to talk about late, right? And again, this is something that's really easy to do when we feel attacked, right?
Sure. Yeah. The emotional intensity and the reaction is super high.
Yes.
Now we can't even hear each other anymore either because that whole frontal lobe is shut down because the blood's going for fight or flight mode. We can't talk. And Yeah. It just spirals down.
Yep. So finally, stonewalling is probably the easiest one to explain because it's where you just kind of shut down and refuse to talk about it. So this could be for, you know, mid conversation, you've just had enough and you just either walk away or you just, you know, cross your arms and kind of look at the floor and you're like, I'm just not talking. So stonewalling is basically without warning, you're leaving the conversation, whether physically or emotionally. So these are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's a big cornerstone of Gottman's work. But the good news is that there are antidotes to all of these, which is what I'm always interested in because it's like, okay, we know the problem. Like, what's the solution?
And here's what they did is so unique, I think, in terms of marital therapy, because with these antidotes, they didn't just look at what's not going well. They said, I think they examine the actual marriages, relationships that are working and where people report feeling satisfied and fulfilled. And this is where those antidotes came from.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because they actually, for shorthand, they call it masters of marriage and disasters. So, yes, they've identified here's what the marriage masters do. And here's, you know, these positive things. And then the marriage disasters would be like a lot of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So before we keep going, I'm thinking about people who might be listening to this podcast and kind of being like, nope, like I'm noticing, you know, some 4 horsemen going on and I'm not sure what to do, but maybe it's never occurred to them, you know, or maybe they've thought about couples therapy and they're like, well, I can never do that, you know? So I just wanted to kind of talk about what do you think are the reasons why people might not want to pursue couples counseling?
Well, you mentioned defensiveness, and I think I can hear people responding just very defensively.
Sure.
And we don't have a problem. I mean, it's not that big of a problem. We're fine. You know, I like that. We're fine dropping the F word there. And so I think there's this fear, though, that's ultimately behind that. And the fear is rooted in shame, and I don't want to be exposed. Because I think we all know, like I do bring my stuff here.
Yep.
And I don't want to be accountable. I don't want. It's funny. We want intimacy.
Yes.
But to have intimacy, there is a prerequisite of some vulnerability.
Oh, that's so true.
And so I want it, but I don't want to do what it's going to take. And so I think therapy, people know there's some vulnerability. I have to talk about stuff I don't want to talk about. I have to be vulnerable and let my spouse and my partner see me.
Yes. And a stranger.
And a stranger, this strange person. It's called a therapist. See this as well. So I think it's very threatening, you know, apart from actually being in the office. I think once people get in the office
and they meet once they meet you or I, they're like, oh, this is great.
They're like, well, that guy's probably messed up worse than me. Right. No. So I'm not alone. But I think there is a sense of authenticity.
Yes.
Hopefully there is by therapists where we can say, hey, we don't, we're not always masters and we've been disasters. And there you go. And so it helps to have that vulnerability by the therapist too.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned that about the we're fine mentality, right? Because I wish it was more acceptable for people to just come and get a relationship checkup even with a therapist, right? Because I think there's this misconception that things have to be really, really bad before I come in with my spouse or my partner for couples counseling. And I know some couples do like maybe premarital counseling or something like that. But I think in general, there's this idea that like we have to be really in dire straits to get help, which I think is the reason that's a myth is because if you come in for just kind of a checkup, let's say you're listening to this podcast and there's some 4 horsemen maybe going on in your relationship, the hopeful part is you can change those things pretty easily just by shifting your interaction patterns. So you absolutely don't have to wait until it's horrible, terrible, like we're hanging by a thread. If anything, even if you're just going through maybe a tough time, I think it can be really helpful to just come in and see like, okay, what are we doing well? Because you're probably doing way more well than you think you are. And then what can we kind of tweak and work on?
Well, and I appreciate you saying that because we kind of focus on those areas of dysfunction.
Yes.
And we worry about being seen. We worry like there's something wrong with me. All that shame forces us to want to hide.
Right.
And we don't have to. And really just to normalize, like there are masters, so to speak, but there's not a lot of them. I mean, a very small percentage of relationships are considered that are masters. The vast majority are having those elements that are disastrous.
Right.
And like I wasn't kidding. Like all of those elements of disaster, that comes natural for me.
Sure.
I can get critical. I don't have to try. Okay, to be defensive, I could do that in my sleep. I probably do. And so I just want to normalize that.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't come into this having all the tools that we need. In fact, we have tools that don't work, so that's okay.
And again, I'm glad you brought that up about how naturally some of these more negative or damaging things come to all of us, because I was about to say, like, why do you think that is? Like, why do these things come so naturally to us? And one of the things that I try to normalize for a couple when they come to therapy is like, a lot of what we learn about relationships, we just have observed, it's familiar, and it's not about blaming like our parents or family members or whatever. But if you grew up in a family where sarcasm was your second language, right?
Yes.
You're going to use it and not even realize how it might be affecting others, right? So again, we're not blaming your family of origin or the way you grew up or anything like that. But if you see your parents or, important caregivers relating to each other in certain ways, you're going to kind of emulate that, right? And you're going to be like, oh, this is just how relationships are. And it's like, well, sure, but there's things you can do to have it be even better. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's our relationship with our partner is crucial. We take it everywhere we go. It affects how we work.
Yep.
It affects how we vacation. It affects how we play. It affects our mood driving in home in the car.
Yep.
So, and if it's good, fine. It can also be great.
Yes. I thought of another thing that I think would deter people from maybe seeking couples counseling. I think there's a misconception. I don't know about what you think about this, Brett, but I think there's a misconception that the therapist is going to take a side.
Ooh, actually, I'm so glad you brought that up.
And because I think people think like, okay, we're going to tell a neutral third party, almost like an attorney or something. Like, here's what all happened, and now you have to declare who is in the wrong.
who's the winner and who's the loser.
Right. And I think also in a strange way, sometimes people think, well, if we go to couples therapy, what if the therapist tells us we should just split up? So I want to clear this up because it is, I want people to clearly hear me. The role of the therapist in couples counseling is not to declare a winner. And it is not to tell you to either stay together or break up. In fact, if you go to a couples therapist and they tell you to break up, or, if they're like putting expectations on what's going to happen in your relationship future.
Right.
That is not good couples therapy.
Well, I thought of an analogy as you were talking about this. Remember the movie Apollo 13?
Yes.
And the astronauts are in their capsule on the dark side of the moon. Ooh. So they've lost all sort of contact and communication with Houston.
Yeah. Yep.
And everyone's talking about they don't have this, they don't have that, they don't have this other thing. And everyone's talking about all the problems. And then
down on the ground, right?
Right, back at Houston. And then like Ed Harris, I think, was the actor who played, I think, the director of Houston there.
Sure.
And he just told everyone to be quiet. He said, I want to know, what do they have going for themselves right now? And let's focus on getting them home based on what they have going for themselves. And I think that's kind of a good analogy of what we try to do as therapists.
Yep.
You might come in and have all sorts of, this is what's going wrong, and that's what's going wrong, and this is problematic, and he does this, and she never does. And we'll try to take a breath with you, try to validate that, and say, okay, let's also focus on what you guys have going right.
Right.
Let's build on that so we can get you home. Because you're obviously here because you care about yourself. If you didn't care about yourselves and the relationship, you wouldn't be here, nor would you be feeling as hurt as you do. And so a lot of people think they're worried, I think, too, that
very much so.
I might actually hate my partner, which means I don't love my partner anymore.
Yes.
And no, it's not at all. In fact, hate and love are very closely related. They're both very intense.
Exactly. No, I love that analogy. I'm just remembering how good of a movie that is. I want to watch it again. But yeah, it's like, no, let's focus on what you do have going for you. And the therapist is not going to declare who's right, who's wrong, and make a ruling. It's more like, let's just take kind of a history of the relationship. What's going well? What are the things that you get caught up in? And I think the focus needs to be, like you said, strengths. And then again, how are you? I want to talk about something called bids for connection. So another thing that the Gottman research revealed was that an emotional drift over time is one of the most difficult things to overcome in a committed relationship or marriage. So it's not the conflict. It's not the affairs. It's not, some of these other big things you would think. It's that emotional drift away from one another. So one of the things that Gottman really gets into is bids for connection. So what that means, that can be almost anything, which I really appreciated because it just puts it in such simple everyday terms. So things like, saying good morning. I was working with a couple recently, and the first thing the husband was doing was telling her about a chore that needed to be done immediately in the morning before saying good morning. And I was like, that's a bid for connection, right? She wants to hear good morning first. Right. So something as simple as that, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of it's garbage day, she wanted to hear good morning.
Imagine that.
So it can be something like that. It can be inviting your partner to spend time with you. I mean, it can be kind of anything, but basically what Gottman was analyzing is how many bids for connection are being made between either partner, and that can be either in a conversation or in day-to-day life, and then how is the other partner responding? So if the other partner is ignoring a bid for connection, that's something we can start changing right away, because that hurts. I think it does hurt. That was a predictor.
But what if it's not ignoring? You're just oblivious to the bid.
Nice. Well, that's a thing that can be really helpful then, because you can, if you go and have someone kind of talk with you about your interactions, they might, the therapist might be able to point out like, hey, did you realize that's a bid for connection? And that's exactly what happened with this couple I was working with, is he had no idea that it was important to her to be greeted by him first.
Right. A lot of times we have no idea. So I come home, my little dog Taylor is wagging her tail. She's so excited. Yep. Clear bid for connection, right? And I see it, I identify it, and I'm like over the moon. And especially in the land of Minnesota nice, we're more passive aggressive, and we can be like having bids are disguised, instead of just outright saying what we need. So if I'm frustrated and I'm feeling unheard, I might say, and like clearly my spouse needs to know I need some validation here because I went,
That's a bid for connection.
Yes,
a sigh, even a sigh, or like an exasperated, like slump of your shoulders is a bid for connection, because it's like, if your partner sees you, they're like, oh, you're wanting me to engage with you somehow, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So bids for connection is a really big one. I'm trying to think, can you think of any other examples of bids for connections that couples might have, like, day to day?
Well, it's I think of this in the area of marriage and family therapy, where we look at relationships as systems. We talk about how all behavior is communication. So if we just look at pretty much any of our behaviors, we are communicating, and many of them can be attempts to bid. It could be, so, hey, how was your day?
Sure.
It could be a sigh. It could be something like, oh, hey, I got you, a bottle of wine, it's over on the counter. And so all behavior is communication. And when we look at that, we might be able to identify that someone's having a bid to connect with me. Now, the drift is inevitable. It's like when you're in the ocean, you have to sort of look and say, oh, there's our towels and there's our umbrella on the beach. And if you don't keep looking back, you will inevitably drift.
No, that's a great analogy too, because the drift happens of its own, right? Like, it's not something that, this is like every couple. So it is, because it's inevitable. I'm glad you pointed that out. That's important.
And so we have to be very vigilant. Keep coming back to, oh, wow, look, there's our umbrella. We got all the way down here. And I have to head back. And I think we don't do that. We're not very vigilant. Nor aware that drift is inevitable. And I go back to my dog, or virtually any dog. What is the dog's job? The dog's job is to be vigilant and study.
Yes.
And so I think I've said this before. My dog knows, based on how I get off the couch, if I'm going to the fridge, if I'm going to the bathroom, if I'm grabbing her leash. And she knows because she's been watching me all the time. And there's been body scans that show on the body there is this invisible button, and it says autopilot. And we unconsciously, subconsciously press this auto button pilot. That, like, okay, well, we're married, we're in our routine, and like we're on autopilot, and we forget the inevitability of drift. And the need to keep being vigilant and studying our spouse so we can see these bids.
Yes, I think that is so huge. And actually, that kind of segues into one of the antidotes. So there's also, good news is, if there's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, there's antidotes, like things that can counteract this. So I think one of the things you were touching on is that awareness to what's going on with your partner. And that's going to be things like finding ways to appreciate them. So, like, catch them doing something you appreciate. So you were talking about vigilance. So instead of being vigilance for like what's irritating you or what's not being done, your vigilance can turn into, how can I catch my partner doing all the things that I love and adore and want them to do, right? So I think that's a big antidote to the criticism piece. Because criticism, you're looking for the wrongs. So expressing appreciation, increasing appreciation, is the antidote to criticism.
And it shapes their behavior. If people know, oh, you like this? Oh, okay, cool. I'll keep doing it.
Right. Exactly. And then, so it's a little bit kind of touches on the contempt piece as well, because it's a similar way of, contempt is kind of that disgust, or kind of that, like, I'm mocking you. And appreciation is also an antidote for that. I think just being aware of, kind of the humor that you're using, if you're using a lot of sarcasm, if you're doing a lot of teasing that's sort of putting the other person down, and turning it into like a playful teasing about things you love about them. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being playful with your partner, but it's all about the spirit of like, what's my goal here? So if my goal is to be playful, maybe I can focus on things I love about them instead of ways that they've disappointed me or things that irritate me. Again, we're just kind of changing it into, we're going from a negative to a positive.
Well, and notice, I can't help but think, growing up in elementary school, boys make bids for connection with girls.
By teasing them.
Pulling on their hair, things like that.
He must like you because he's teasing you.
Yeah, and I think of men in general, like, we make bids to connect, and we'll go and we'll punch some guy in the shoulder. Hey, how's it going, dude? How are you?
Yes.
We're not going to hug each other. Heaven forbid. But we're socialized to look for bids in ways that aren't really effective.
Exactly. And again, without knowing it.
Right.
And I'm just thinking about, extended family of my own. Like when I get around certain family members, I go straight into that like biting, sarcastic humor.
Yeah.
And again, it is that subconscious, like this is just how we talk to each other. So you can imagine if you're in a relationship and that's how your family of origin is, not realizing that it can be, and then you get together with someone whose family was not at all like that, and they're just all positive humor, then that could definitely be a point of tension.
Real disconnect.
Like, why does it feels like you're always putting me down? And it's like, no, I'm just trying to connect with you, right?
Yeah, and it can then notice the defensiveness.
Yes,
putting you down.
Yes,
what do you mean I'm putting you down? How could you say I'm putting you down?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so that brings me to what's an antidote for defensiveness? Accepting responsibility. So whether or not you agree with what your partner is saying, you can say, you know what, I probably do that, right? So if your partner says, I've noticed that you put off, this or that thing till the very last minute, instead of saying like, I don't do that. What about last week when I blah, blah, blah? Just say, you're probably right. Tell me more. Even if you don't know if they're probably right, it's not like you're lying, but you're just kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt. Like my partner wouldn't probably be saying this unless there was some reason why. And there's
such vulnerability in a negative way when we get defensive. Like, I can't be wrong. Mm-hmm. Well,
why not?
Why not? Why would we expect I can never be wrong?
Right.
Where does that come from? I don't know the answer, but it's a question worth asking. Where does that come from? And of course I'm not going to be right all the time.
Right, exactly. Which brings us to stonewalling. So this one, it's okay. So stonewalling is if you're kind of shutting down, leaving the conversation. It's okay to take a break. So I think the big piece here is communication. So if you're like shutting down during an argument and you find yourself kind of just wanting to leave or stop talking, all you have to do is say, hey, I need 10 minutes. I need 10, 20 minutes, whatever it is. Let's take a break from this conversation, but then let's come back. So there's nothing wrong with taking a moment to gather yourself, especially if you're starting to get heated, if you're starting to get upset. That is fine to be aware of that, but then just let your partner know, when are we coming back to this? So that's a big thing.
Yeah, let them know that even if you don't know when, let them know we will come back to this. And I always tell couples that that's actually crucial.
Yes.
Because when the emotion gets high, we don't think very well, we are impulsive, and I say terminate, separate, meditate, then communicate. And so you're coming back. But you're right. You have to take a break sometimes. And you have to honor that for the other person because they want to take a break. And you're like, no, I want to fight. Exactly. And you go after and pursue them to argue, but you have to respect that.
Right.
And that's a bid to disconnect.
Yes.
And we have to honor that as well.
Yes, exactly. So those are some antidotes to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And I hope it's been helpful for people listening today. I mean, listen with your partner. We've said this before with other podcast episodes. Listen with a partner, a friend, and kind of just take stock and say, hey, do you think we could use a relationship checkup?
Always applicable, and sometimes it's absolutely necessary too. And we're somewhere on that spectrum, all of us.
Yes.
So we hope you did take away some good practical helps. I think we could do another podcast maybe next week. Just thinking out loud. You kind of see how we're doing this off the cuff sometimes.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be fun to add on to this the things, the tips and the tricks and the behavioral things that are really popular with people and couples in particular? Like, hey, these are things
like
that
top
work.
10 or something.
Right.
Top 10
we could
couples.
do top 10. Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
So tune in next time.
Stay tuned, everyone.
Thanks for joining us.
Have a good day.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom & Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.